Daniel, help me!
What a false prophet!
Help me,
You
please!
sniveling boy! I am the third revelation! I am the third revelation!
Welcome to another episode of Dinner and a Movie with Santino Domani, the channel dedicated to making long-dead, antiquated fads like dignity, accountability, and dinner conversation cool again. I am, in fact, Santino, and spoiler alert for those of you who haven't had the chance to go out and see the most recent summer blockbuster Supreme Court decision, much to the chagrin of sexual deviants, the criminally insane, and Aztec high priests everywhere, the United States Supreme Court has ruled, in a 6-3 decision, that the dismemberment of children for the appeasement of Moloch is not, I repeat, is not a right enshrined within the Constitution of the United States, and, as such, each individual state is now burdened with the unthinkable task of determining whether or not slaughtering children as a matter of convenience is morally defensible. Yes, in a stunning landmark decision, Moloch, Schumer, and Pelosi et al., the common decency in all that is good and holy in the world was overturned in favor of those who brazenly and openly reject the Antichrist, leaving the bloodthirsty hedonist troglodytes of the left thoroughly perplexed at first, with their stupid mouths agape and unibrows furrowed in a vain attempt to wrap their heads around such alien concepts as law, civility, and personal responsibility, then outright incensed and embittered at the implication that not having to take responsibility for the consequences of their degeneracy isn't something their government can guarantee them as a self-evident constitutional certainty. Now, in light of this ludicrously tragic comedy of evil and human fallibility unfolding before us, we're going to be taking a look at a movie which I feel has much to say on the subject. Truth be told, I was hoping to get a few more episodes under my belt before I tore into this one. Frankly, there's quite a bit I have to say about it, and I really wanted to have a little bit more experience producing, writing scripts, voice acting, marketing, filming, cooking in front of an audience of quite literally dozens of people, editing, directing, managing. Oh, that's okay. And lastly, but not the least of which, attempting to untangle the web of mystery that is the fickle bitch we've all come to know as social media, in order to get this one-man dog and pony show off the ground. But since I've recently outsourced my fishing downtime to a Norwegian national who can get the job done in about half the time for about half the cost.
What is it, bass? No, it's carp.
I should be able to start getting material out a little bit quicker from here on out. But at the end of the day, what can you do? Sometimes your boy Clarence brings down the gavel and starts ladling out thick, steamy bowls of Supreme Court justice and smiting the agents of Satan before you're entirely ready.
But then the Chief J just went off. He said, man, whatever, the guy's guilty as shit. We all know that.
And let's be honest, there's only one thing a man can do. He improvises, adapts, and overcomes.
Is that more than one thing? Okay!
And I intend to do just that. So buckle up, you magnificent bastard Jews, because there's a good chance that by the end of this one, you'll have witnessed a man's liver explode in a beautiful nebulous of alcohol-fueled truth, vitriol, and obscure film references. Paul Thomas Anderson's 2007 commentary on Family and Fury, Faith and Fortune. There Will Be Blood will be the vessel through which I possibly find myself shaking hands with the Almighty. And while I may or may not be writhing in agony, futilely trying to punch my liver back into some sort of working order, you can watch B-roll of me throwing this episode's meal together. Much akin to the sensibilities of our prospecting would-be hero, we're keeping it relatively complicated today by cooking up a delicious, seared, medium-rare tri-tip steak for which I can almost certainly guarantee you there will be a small amount of blood. A rich bearnaise sauce to top it with.
Do you have bread? We have potatoes.
Some creamy, mouth-watering mashed potatoes, and a simple but delicious milkshake to wash the whole thing down with. Just make sure you do yourself a favor and keep it away from this guy.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, and they're like, it's better than yours.
And this meal I like to call the Feast of the Third Revelation. Now let's get after it.
I'm sorry we don't have any bread.
No.
This is Daniel Plainview, my hero. That is, at least according to the wife, whenever we're arguing about whether or not we should go out and do things amongst people with their goddamned faces and their snot-riddled, back-talking, unintended consequences they call their children.
With green hair, bones in their noses.
With all their asinine, superficial, almost entirely self-inflicted problems that they're more than happy to burden everybody else with, and their goddamn they-thems and their zers, and you can't call me Ellen, but Elliot, when you call me, you can call me Al, just don't call me late for dinner, and their goddamn newspeak because gender is a construct, so there's no such thing as a girl, but make sure you affirm my identity as a girl or else you're a bigot. And oh no, the sun is going to catch fire and the eastern seaboard is going to be underwater by 2005, and then El Nino is going to come, and then the poles are going to switch, and then the hole in the ozone is getting bigger, and the killer bees are coming, but the regular bees are going, and there's going to be no more flowers or trees or drinking water. Right to infanticide, and you want grandma to die if you don't stop a microscopic airborne virus by wearing a surgical mask designed to protect surgeons from blood sprays while they're performing surgeries, and don't forget to get your booster so the protected can be protected from the unprotected by forcing the unprotected to use the protection that didn't protect the protected, because it will totally make you immune because it's safe and effective. So be grateful for the administration that turned the same poison, experimental, rushed, legally untouchable big pharma handout coming from the tiny orange hands of literally Adolf Hitler into a generally safe and somewhat effective prophylactic measure to immunize you from COVID. I mean to keep you from spreading COVID. I mean to protect you from COVID. I mean to keep you out of the hospital because of COVID. I mean to keep you from dying from COVID. And grocery store clerks are essential workers who need to go to work because they're essential, but public school union members like teachers and administrators are essential workers who need to stay home, of course, because they're so essential. But even if we were wrong in destroying your business, locking you in your home for 2 years, forcing you to take drugs against your will, and irreparably psychologically damaging your children didn't keep you from getting COVID 7 times, it's okay because it wasn't like there were any other unintended consequences, and even if there were, don't worry because you won't remember, because look over here, Ukraine is under attack by another literally Hitler, so make sure you vote to let us tax you so we can follow your paycheck to our criminal buddies through government-funded think tanks, grants, and public sector unions who then help us get reelected, but are also totally going to solve whatever problem it is this time we've convinced you is totally going to kill you and everyone on the planet within the next 5 years because we've done such a great job in the past.
God, shut up! Everyone just shut the fuck up!
More often than not, we usually settle on staying in.
Yes, you would drink too if you knew the world half so well as I do.
Now, imagine, if you will, a hypothetical scenario in which two of the most cynical and cantankerous characters the mind could ever hope to have conjured, say, for example, Scrooge McDuck and George Carlin.
Think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize half of them are stupider than that.
Meet each other's eyes from opposite ends of a long bar table at some dusky-hued pit of a sawdust joint precisely at the perfectly wrong moment in each of their tragically misunderstood and passion-bereft lives. George smiles at Scrooge, and Scrooge, with cautious optimism, as he's been hurt so many times before, offers a coy little smile of his own, then proceeds to buy George a fuzzy navel. In some strange and inexplicable fit of romantic dissonance against reason and self-preservation, George finds courage of his own to rise from his place at the bar table with the intention of thanking the generous, eccentrically dressed waterfowl. Much to his relief, George's appreciation is well received, and a subsequent conversation is born of the simple exchange. And it's 9 months after this cathartic and unlikely interaction that the single most grizzled, surly, and unapologetic baby in world history is born, and is subsequently robbed at gunpoint, audited by the IRS, and denied an insurance claim every single goddamn day thereafter. Meet that man at the age of 40, kick him swiftly but squarely in the testicles, and now you've come close to almost beginning to understand the angry muddle that is Daniel Plainview. Daniel Plainview is quite literally
A grizzled 1890s prospector. Concern it.
And while he currently appears to be occupying the bottom of the totem pole in terms of the prospector's hierarchy, this brief glimpse of Daniel Plainview's prospecting origins paint a portrait of the man we will ultimately understand him to come to be. More on that, though, a little later. Daniel continues to do his best scratching a living off the land, inching his way one small, unimpressive claim at a time, reinvesting in himself with every marginal profit in an effort to achieve some ultimate form of success we slackers, roustabouts, and California public sector union representatives
California.
couldn't even begin to wrap our heads around. And as Daniel appears to be on the precipice of some significant success by way of his tenacity and ingenuity in the business of excavating crude oil, old causality
pulls down its pants and prepares to lower its ass
on Daniel Plainview once again when his partner comes to his unfortunate end in the most grotesque and comical of fashions, leaving our socially decrepit and heroically ignoble protagonist with the Sisyphusian task of attempting to serve as a loving father figure for a child, HW, that isn't actually his. And while Daniel is clearly not Father of the Year by any stretch of the imagination, and regardless of the fact that we might rethink the nature of their relationship by the time the curtain ultimately closes on the film, it's very clearly established throughout the duration of the film that Daniel quite obviously loves HW very much, despite the rather obvious ongoing struggle he bears trying to balance his roles as a loving father and a budding oil magnate, intent to echo his hard-won legacy through the annals of history by entrusting it to a member of his extremely limited family. And so the relationship between Daniel and HW Plainview was forged, fruit born of the ominous blood sacrifice and the altar of that sweet, sweet, bubbly crude.
Oil, that is. Black gold. Texas tea.
From there, the two get into all manner of cheeky adventures together, running around, drilling for oil, solving mysteries, and generally carrying around, as one might expect from a father and son team, consigned to drifting throughout the country together and negotiating leases from one community to the next to drill for their oil. Enter Not Eli. Not Eli, who calls himself Paul Sunday for some reason, manages to track down Daniel so he can trade a hot tip about some oil located on his family's property in a small California town called Little Boston for a little bit of coin.
Das bull, smush bull. I ain't moving to California.
Daniel and Not Eli agree to terms, with Daniel assuring Not Eli that if he travels all the way to Little Boston only to get skunked, not only is he going to find Not Eli and get his money back, he's going to eat Not Eli's lunch and drink his milkshake for good measure. So Daniel and HW infiltrate the Sunday Ranch, cleverly disguised as an unsuspecting father-son camping duo, eager to gun down the most cunning and treacherous of game, the mighty quail.
I hunt quail, Jeremy. They're overpopulated in this region, and they're decimating the grubworm population. You got a fucking problem with that?
Upon their arrival, they're greeted by Not Eli's father, Abel Sunday, and Not Eli's twin brother, Actually Eli, who present themselves quite cordially and help their guests settle to camp on their property. After a quick recon of the area, which confirms Not Eli's information to be indeed quite valuable, Daniel does what Daniel does best and begins assessing ways to negotiate the situation in such a way as to yield top dollar for his investment and efforts, while at the same time trying to explain to HW the mechanics of the situation so that he can grow up to be an oil shark just like his old man. But HW's like, "Don't tell me not to dance, Dad!" and starts whining about what's going to happen to the Sunday family after they get paid way more money for their property than what they think it's worth, suggesting that he'd like for Daniel to tell them that there's a good chance that their land is significantly more valuable than they think it is.
I'd like to be pimps from Oakland or cowboys from Arizona, but it's not Halloween. Grow up, Peter Pan. Count Chocula.
So the stage is set, and Daniel has Abel Sunday ready to sign on the dotted line and get the drilling going, when Actually Eli transforms from Mother Cabrini to Gordon Gekko right before everyone's very eyes and negotiates a significantly higher price for the property than Daniel was hoping to pay, or Abel could have possibly hoped to have gotten, suggesting a much more ambitious and conniving side to Actually Eli, as opposed to the meek and mild-mannered man of God he's paraded himself and will continue to parade himself as. With the Sunday Ranch in his back pocket and a song in his cold black heart, Daniel sets out to buy up all the land he can around Little Boston before word gets out and he's forced to get into a bidding war with the likes of well-established oil titans like Standard and Union Oil, a war which he knows he stands no chance of winning. Fast forward a bit and Daniel is sitting pretty, as he owns the rights not only to drill almost the entirety of Little Boston, but the rights of whatever that drilling might produce. Yes, things are looking good for not only Daniel, but for Little Boston itself, as well as the members of its community who stand to reap the benefits of the prosperity Daniel aims to usher in. That is, with one possible exception. You see, up until Daniel Plainview moseyed on into town with all his smart talk about oil and roads and bread and such, Actually Eli had been more or less calling the shots around the small and sophisticated community as the head of what appears to be not merely the only church in Little Boston, but the only structured institution at all. In other words, Actually Eli played, or at least enjoyed appearing to play, something of a paternal figure to the more vulnerable and impressionable within within the community, and considering the harsh and desolate landscape they find themselves living in, it's safe to assume that there is no shortage of vulnerable and impressionable people within the community to prey upon. Concerned that someone else might threaten his monopoly on authority and influence over the community by actually providing solutions to their problems, as well as legitimate leadership and conviction, actually Eli makes a desperate attempt to curb the upsetting of the apple cart. He walks straight into Daniel's office and asserts the full force of his dominance by insisting that he will bless the newly built oil derrick at a ceremony celebrating its successful construction, effectively ensuring that whatever fruition the endeavor comes to bear can almost exclusively be attributed to him rather than Daniel. Having been more or less beneath his notice since the negotiation of the Sunday property, Daniel is perplexed by actually Eli's ostentatious and misbegotten sense of entitlement and is like,
"What would you say you do here?"
Heartily seasoned in the art of bullshit detection, it's not long before Daniel gets wise to the grift. He placates actually Eli with an assurance that he's more than welcome to bless the well, but when the moment eventually arrives, Daniel relishes the opportunity to embarrass actually Eli in front of his own congregation, and in fact his family and the rest of the town, by effectively plagiarizing his blessing and asserting to the community that it's not one man, read, it's not actually Eli, that prospects from the ground. Rather, it takes a whole community of good people. And from there, it's game on. The well subsequently proves, but at a considerable and unexpected expense, that effectively serves as a reckoning of sorts, not merely for the audience, but for H.W., Daniel's associates, others, and in my opinion, Daniel himself. What's more, it serves as the catalyst for the immortalization of the conflict between him and actually Eli, the conflict which, I think, is essentially the heart of the film. Let me explain.
Okay, coming.
Another one of the reasons why I was particularly looking forward to creating this review, even knowing in the back of my mind what a massive undertaking I would be subjecting myself to, was because I consider Daniel Plainview to be one of the most misunderstood, misrepresented, and unjustly vilified characters in all of cinema. And judging by P.T. Anderson and Daniel Day-Lewis's analysis of the character of Daniel Plainview, to which I'll place a link in the comments, I don't think it would be unreasonable to assume that they would agree with me. But of course, that certainly hasn't stopped the likes of the Weekend Weimar Warriors and Backyard Bronsteins on YouTube from pissing all over it. To quote a few takes, this agnosticism surrounding the objective atrocities that he commits in the film is why his performance is so disturbing. You feel a dispassionate removal of moral hierarchy from his actions. A monster fueled by pure ego and rage. A capitalist hell-bent on extracting as much money from the land Eli and his family had lived on for generations. Constantly manipulating those around him. He's ostensibly weaponized capitalism. He's the face of pure ambition. His mind is constantly scheming the demise of those around him. Except, of course, when he's helping other people succeed in their own personal endeavors.
I want to tell you, Gene, if you're going to make a play, look east. I'd rather it be you than someone else. And this lot around here has been taken. I paid him $10,000 cash in hand. Just like that. He has his own company now. Prosperous little business, 3 wells producing $5,000 a week.
Now, when you consider Daniel Day-Lewis's quote discussing the character and the nature of the film, in which he considers both to be an honest examination of a life, to which I completely agree, the invective hurled at the character of Plainview from the professional loafers I quoted earlier appears to be more of an indictment of them as opposed to Daniel, about their experience starting from nothing and making something of yourself, in spite of the jackals and the sharks and the YouTube commentators circling your wagon waiting for the slightest display of weakness so they can slit your throat, steal your wife, and drink your milkshake. And as little as those work-averse pseudo-intellectuals appear to know about building a business and running it effectively, I suspect they know even less about what it means to raise children. Quote, a monster fueled by pure ego and rage. You know, every time I read that quote, I have to ask myself if this loungeabout even realized that there were other parts of the film that didn't involve Daniel conspiring to build his oil empire. The oil empire he wanted to build so that he could give it to his son. So his son wouldn't have to struggle as he did. His son that he adopted because no one else would. because he's a monster motivated by nothing other than ego and rage. Now, before one of you out there goes and hurls your soy milk at the computer, frothing at the mouth, screaming at your cat about, he said he didn't like anybody, he said that thing to you-know-who during the second to last scene, when Joe Gunda dies, all he can think about is recovering the bit. Well, first things first, there's an old axiom in what we posers on the outside of the accomplished writer scene like to call the biz that goes, show, don't tell. And director P.T. Anderson puts on a clinic with There Will Be Blood doing just that. The fact of the matter is, by Anderson's admission, I'm not just pulling this out of my ass, the character of Daniel Plainview is made to appear outwardly conflicted. This is made especially prevalent during Daniel's final interaction with his son, as well as the subsequent montage reflecting upon their relationship. I'm really going to do my best not to ruin one of my favorite exchanges between characters, 4 of them, as a matter of fact, in modern cinema. And yes, for those of you who've already seen it, take care to remember that there are 4 people engaging in that exchange, and not without good reason. H.W. asks his father if they can be alone, more or less so he can talk to his father about coming to an understanding about how each one fits into each other's lives. But H.W. isn't actually appealing to his father for an intimate moment between just the 2 of them. He is, in fact, requesting that his father's associate leave, while insinuating that his own associate be allowed to stay. Sure, maybe H.W. can't hear read lips to any particularly effective degree, but I think we could all at least agree that they could communicate through writing if H.W. really wanted an intimate moment alone with his father. All take and no give. A story as old as time for our poor friend Daniel.
I hate most people. There are times when I look at people and I see nothing worth liking.
Of course he does. Why wouldn't he? Actually, Eli manifests this hatred Plainview embodies in a tangible form. He represents why Daniel has such a disdain for so many in such a way the audience can understand. He is everything that Daniel, as well as myself and so many others who aren't exactly of the art film critiquing ilk, have come to hate after years of study, training, and work in arduous and often tentative endeavors that make no guarantees of success. The hypocrite. Worse than a do-nothing, worse than a liar, worse than a thief. The hypocrite is the politician that lectures people about how selfish it is to get your hair cut during a pandemic.
We are sending inspectors out. We will demand that you do this, and if you do not, we will shut you down.
Then, when caught doing just that, won't lose a minute of sleep, justifying her hypocrisy by insisting that, well, she's more important than you, and that, unlike you repulsive dirt-farming peasants, takes her personal hygiene very seriously.
I'm out in the public eye, and, you know, I'm a person who, I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt like I needed to have a haircut. I'm not able to do that myself, and so I got a haircut.
But in light of all that, take a minute to also consider what Daniel says the very next moment in the exact same exchange, and see if that doesn't get you thinking twice about Daniel's motivations and values.
Having you here gives me a second breath. I can't keep doing this on my own.
Actually, Eli, on the other hand, has absolutely no trouble conducting himself in much the same way as our well-primped, fish-eyed hypocrite. He maintains that his power and authority is derived from no less than God himself, but that his failure to achieve success is because of the nefariousness and stupidity of others, going so far as to blame his father for inviting Daniel under their roof to negotiate the sale of their property, despite the fact that it was actually Eli who did the whole of the negotiating. While Daniel despises actually Eli, not necessarily because he sees him for what he truly is, a conjurer of cheap tricks bullying and manipulating old widows and simple potato farmers into turning out their pockets at his feet, but because his dog and pony show is a massive obstruction to Daniel's aspirations in Little Boston. Actually, Eli's hatred for Daniel stems from the fact that Daniel seems to be the only one within the community who can see through actually Eli's horseshit, or at least appears to be the only one with the cojones to call him on it. And that's pretty understandable if you're asking me, because it's been my experience that nothing pisses off a person more than rubbing their nose in their own hypocrisy, and Daniel is more than happy to do just that when the opportunity presents itself. Daniel, being the reactionary that he is, certainly doesn't shy away from conflict when it presents itself, but pay particular attention to his interaction with Gene Blaze, the oil prospector Daniel runs into at the train station, who he's obviously on friendly terms with, despite the fact that he's obviously his
competitor.
When asked, it must be easy when you have such a cute face to carry around with you. Daniel doesn't lose his mind and threaten to slit Gene's throat at the insinuation. He gives Gene an out, rather.
Telling me how handsome my son is?
Well, that I am.
That's very nice, thank you.
Not only that, he's good enough to let him know not to waste his time here because the quote mud has already been bought. He should look east because he would rather it be him than someone else. So much for the man whose motivation is simply for no one else to succeed. Alright then, smart guy. How come he goes all Bill O'Reilly on the representatives from Standard Oil then? Most considerably Tilford.
We'll do it live! Fuck it! Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! Fucking thing sucks!
In 5, 4, 3.
That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today. I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks again for watching. We'll leave you with Sting and a cut off his new album. Take it away.
Well, it's because Daniel sees him as someone who hasn't paid his dues like Daniel has, but they still literally want a seat at the table with him. And as far as Daniel is concerned, they're no different than actually Eli, snakes slithering around in the grass waiting to, quote, buy up other people's hard work. They don't scratch around in the ground like the rest of us. He's an inhuman monster for asking where the bit is after Joe Gunda dies. Yeah, well, somebody fucking has to, you limp-wristed sack of drugs and sadness. Yes, it's important to grieve. Yes, it's important to be empathetic and understanding. But at the end of the day, it doesn't put food on the table for either you or the other countless number of people who are depending on you to get the job done. And unfortunately, that's simply a reality of life. An unpleasant reality, but a reality nonetheless that doesn't simply disappear because something emotionally compelling happened. And it's precisely what both actor and director considered to be the portrayal of the character of Daniel Plainview, an honest examination of the hard realities associated with the apparent dichotomy of how making something of oneself correlates with ensuring that one's children have been adequately prepared to make something of themselves, a fundamental existential question that has embedded itself in the hearts and souls of every loving father since the dawn of time. Daniel Plainview is a man who understands the harsh, indifferent, and unjust nature of the world, but more importantly, he understands that blinking in the face of it will more than likely only lead to more suffering. Any roustabout shaking hands with the devil on an oil rig off the coast of Alaska, or smoke jumper diving out of an airplane to dig trenches in the bowels of hell will understand that flinching in the face of the unpleasant costs lives. And speaking as a man who's been in the shit up to his balls once or twice in his time, displaying conviction when things get unpleasant or difficult isn't the mark of a necessarily calloused or hard-hearted man. More often than not, it's a virtue instilled in a seasoned man who's come to understand more than likely the hard way the terrible cost that can come of hesitation, ambivalence, and perhaps most difficult of all for many to understand, untimely compassion. And it's in this sense that having a plain view is, in my opinion, an honorary epithet rather than a besmirchment. Another common talking point that seems to come up when these liberal star-bellied sneetches on YouTube get their soft, feculent booger hooks around this film is that capitalism has failed because it's promised prosperity for everyone and didn't deliver. And there will be blood as a critique upon that economic system by way of its portrayal of Daniel Plainview as a driven, hard-working, and most disturbing of all, apparently, successful prospector. My question for this special breed of gastropod is, if capitalism has failed because it hasn't magically showered everybody with success, what exactly is your metric for success? Mansions, fast cars, $50,000 watches, weekends in Vegas drinking martinis and hustling the pie gow tables in between sultry love affairs and international assassinations? Maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't with the fundamental principles of capitalism in and of itself. Maybe the problem is that the people who are so content to piss all over it are doing so from their air-conditioned Ivy League towers so far away from anything even remotely resembling struggle, it never occurs to them that for just about every single person in human history, success has come in the form of an absence of an overwhelming abundance of suffering for them and those they care about. And from the bottom of my cholesterol-encrusted heart, I'm perfectly fine with that. Not only am I fine with it, I'm over the moon to be able to live in a place that can afford people such comfort, so much so that the single greatest health concern of the poorest of the poor living under that system is overconsumption. I guess I'm just upset that they don't appreciate it more. They have absolutely zero ability to hypothesize the kind of tremendous suffering capitalism has allowed them to escape from. The very same tremendous suffering that has been, and for many continues to be, par for the course for effectively the entirety of the human population. The same people who demand open borders and consider it criminal to deny people entry into a country that flourishes so well under capitalism will in the next breath promote the implementation of the very same policies these immigrants are hoping to escape from in the first place. place. You show me a North Korean refugee who votes for a bloated government, and I'll show you a dead North Korean refugee who still manages to find a way to vote, with a little help from his good friends over at the DNC, who will maintain, of course, that they're just trying to make voting more accessible for the disabled, or in CNN Newspeak, persons with unfairly disproportionate existing opportunities. And I suppose in light of its unfathomable success, that's one of capitalism's biggest failings. The comfort and prosperity it ushers in for the society that implements it invariably makes a sizable portion of them soft, complacent, and belligerently drunk on comfort to the point where the notion of having the freedom to take care of oneself in whatever way they see fit, independent of some overseer nefariously spoon-feeding them blueprints for how to go about living their lives, as well as the moral framework under which they should be doing it, is seen as an affront to their very dignity. Curiously, they feel entitled to just about everything, never considering for 1 second that, in order for them to have it, someone must be compelled to provide it for them. And when asked what they would do to contribute to their social utopia, in which from each is taken according to their ability, and to each is given according to their need, it's curious that their answers never include the likes of septic tank cleaner, or oil rigger, or wholesale conglomerate patron reception administrator.
Welcome to Costco. I love you. Welcome to Costco. I love you.
But rather include positions like whiskey sommelier, or abstract artist, or breast inspector. So now we have a society of people who are so comfortable and entitled, their plight stems not from an inadequate distribution of resources or from the constant threat of being butchered at the hands of a corrupt centralized government, despite the fact that they could have everything they could possibly need to liberate themselves from famine, predation, pestilence, and war. Someone else has the audacity to have more than them. Thanks a lot, capitalism. Unfortunately, I can't really take the time here to dismantle many of the alternative economic policies, principles, and concepts that invariably surface when some parasitic blue-haired carpetbagger who's recently fled the sinking rat's nest that is California, or what I like to call the devil's banana hammock.
Fucking California.
So they can tag up, shit all over, and bleed dry the decent, hard-working communities that haven't been decimated by decades of catastrophic social policies like the entitled, narcissistic lamprey that they are.
Oh, sure, you need all your blood.
Starts lecturing you about how it's capitalism's fault they're failing to thrive, as opposed to their crippling drug addiction, unwillingness to take any action that would better themselves, or assume any sort of responsibility for their own well-being. Equity, they say, is the answer, which maintains that everyone is entitled to the same outcome, regardless of what effort, insight, ingenuity, competency, or general ethic they might have invested in achieving it. I think that's another long rant for another film review. But for the sake of this one, however, all I would ask is simply take yourself back to a time when you were compelled by one of your towel-smoking, glossy-eyed English professors to complete a group project under the assurance that everyone would receive the same grade regardless of the level of their involvement or mastery of the curriculum, and you'll get a fairly rudimentary understanding of why anyone trying to gas you with this tripe of equity is either dim-witted, disingenuous, or more than likely both.
So equity, as a concept, says recognize that everyone has the same capacity, but in order for them to have equal opportunity to reach that capacity, we must pay attention to this issue of equity.
Brando's got what plants crave.
All right, so before I go ahead and have my 16th infarction carrying on about all this,
You hear that, Elizabeth? I'm coming to join you, honey.
I'd like to wrap up this section by calling attention to a few other points I think are important to dispel this messy rumor besmirching the good name of Plainview. Daniel, much like director Edgar Wright, isn't one to tread forward without careful consideration of the future, and chances are if a seed's been planted, that seed's gonna come home to roost. You heard me.
You do know there are more guns in the country than there are in the city.
Everybody and their mums is packing around there.
Like who?
Farmers.
Who else?
Farmers' mums.
You do know the front door was open again last night.
Mr. Treacher? Yeah, why has he got that big coat on? Can't be cold. Why the extra layer? Maybe he's trying to hide something.
Mr. Treacher.
Morning.
Maybe I'll put this on. It's on random.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Gonna have myself.
Who the hell put this on? It's on random.
For fuck's sake.
Put a sock in it, town mouse.
Yeah, you want to be a big cop in a small town? Fuck off up the model village.
meantime, why don't you check out a few of Martin Blower's clients?
Martin Blower represents damn near most of the village. Do you want us to go through the whole phone book?
Yeah, we'll put a call into Aaron A. Aronson, shall we?
Please, don't be childish.
You did good, kid.
Ta.
What's your name?
Aaron Aarons.
Sorry?
You know what we should do tomorrow? Keep drinking. We'll have a Bloody Mary first thing. Or a bite of the King's Head, couple of the Little Princess. We'll stagger back in. Back at the bar for shots. How's that for a slice of fried gold?
But why is this something to be reviled, as opposed to admired? Why is Daniel's diligence, ambition, tenacity so looked down upon by so many? A good man is a strong man. A strong man is a man who is not easily taken advantage of by bad men. A good man who is easily overcome because of his weaknesses isn't going to help anyone. In other words, a man who can't help himself is more than likely not in any sort of favorable position to help anybody. Just because Daniel Plainview is stern and not easily taken advantage of doesn't inherently make him a villain. Last time I checked, it's Daniel's prosperity through his victories which bring the salvation to the community that actually Eli, true to his millenarian shenanigans, can only promise to deliver at some vague, undetermined point in the future. He comes to Little Boston promising mutual success. Roads, bread, schools, flourishing families, and it's through his virtues that are so readily spat upon by the likes of those who, in place of prosperity and wellness, tend to generate nothing more than misery and dependence for others, that Daniel achieves this mutual success. Oh, and one last thing before I move on. For my part, the score is absolutely brilliant and fits the film like a damn Speedo. It's intense and foreboding, keeping the viewer immersed in what otherwise might be a bit of a long-winded film for those in the audience with the attention span somewhere between that of a Bay Area meth head browsing his TikTok feed and a fucking tsetse fly.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
And yeah, maybe I'm hamming it up ever so slightly, but I think that's because it's one of those rare pearls of joy that you love mostly because it's something great that comes from the most unlikely of places. Sort of like getting a sympathy bone from your hot oncologist. No, it's not nocturnes or anything.
You know, Frederick fucking Chopin.
But it is Johnny fucking Greenwood. And that is, for the layperson, Jonathan Richard Guy Greenwood from that whiny, nasally, effeminate, and insufferable band that you just can't get enough of, Radiohead. Interestingly enough, the score for There Will Be Blood was Johnny Greenwood's first crack at composing for the cinema. And as the story goes, no one was more pleasantly surprised by this unlikely triumph than director Paul Thomas Anderson himself. Even listening to the soundtrack in the absence of the film, I think most would still get a really big kick out of it. Hell, it's the bulk of what I've been listening to while writing this review, not just because I think it's fantastic thinking music, but also because, much like the all too relatable characters of the cantankerous, misunderstood Plainview, as well as the drunken, homicidal writer desperate for both fulfillment and solitude, Jack Torrance, its presence in general scares the ever-loving shit out of my patient, understanding, but ever-vigilant wife. Certainly one of the most common complaints I hear when discussing this movie with friends and family is that it was initially confusing because they didn't know whether or not they were to distinguish between not Eli and actually Eli, that is, Paul and Eli Sunday, as separate individuals. I'm not ashamed to admit I had the same problem the first go-around, for no other reason than I simply forgot the name of the brother that first meets Daniel is Paul. I remember seeing actually Eli for the first time and thinking, oh, I didn't think that was the guy's name, but I guess it is. So what's this guy and his pumpkin pie haircut want with Daniel and HW, and why is he pretending not to know them at all? And then when the name Paul subsequently came up again later in the film at the dinner table, I remember saying out loud, who the fuck is Paul? Now, I don't want to lay it on too thick for my boy P.T. Anderson because the fact of the matter is it wasn't written that way originally in the script. The actor who was cast to play the role of Paul had to drop out for one reason or another, forcing Anderson to come up with the last-minute replacement. I mean, sometimes at the end of the day, you're behind schedule, over budget, and you need to make do with what you have. But to be honest, I can't help but feel like a carefully placed tacit display or bit of dialogue might have saved a whole lot of confusion. I don't know, something akin to, oh, hey Daniel, before I go, you should know that my brother and I are identical twins, so don't go thinking it's me, Paul, you're talking to, and it's actually my brother, Eli, perhaps resulting in the implosion of the entire deal, the wrath of my entire family, and my possible murder. Let's move on.
I'm finished.
There Will Be Blood is an absolutely masterful film that explores compelling and extremely important themes, arguably some of the most primal and complex themes we have the capacity to abstract, in a very real and grounded way that's often quick to get by those who have trouble wrapping their heads around the kind of drive and sense of purpose that might possess a man who's come from nothing and aspires to pull himself out from a pit of destitution and carry someone he loves out with him. And yes, it is done in a very real way, and by real, I mean human. And it's for that reason I felt particularly compelled to make this review at this particular time, significantly later than I was hoping to get it out, though it may be. As I'm sure you've guessed by now, if you've stuck with me up to this point throughout the review, I have some pretty strong opinions regarding what have unfortunately become controversial positions, despite the fact that they have been almost universally agreed upon as indisputably true, and have been used to make consistently successful predictions that were so consistently successful they became self-evident truths that have served as the bedrock holding the improbable fledgling concept of civilization only just above an abysmal descent into chaos and unimaginable suffering across countless civilizations, ever since humanity slithered out of the bush some hundreds of thousands of years ago. Which brings me right back to all this Supreme Court business about overturning Roe versus Wade, and why progressive politicians are shouting themselves hoarse, trying to get you to feel like you just lost one of the most fundamental rights that had ever been enshrined in the Constitution. There's a couple of reasons why progressive politicians, go batshit insane over their love of abortions and try and bullshit anyone willing to listen about how having children means the end of your life, or how aspiring to make a family, as opposed to aspiring to make a career out of shoveling shit for Amazon or Remax, has made slaves or handmaidens out of generations of women that came before us, not the least of those reasons being that nothing hurls a person out of a life of selfishness, complacency, and nihilism faster than having a child. Now, that's not to say there still aren't plenty of people who have had their soul, sense of self-respect, and capacity for empathy crushed to the point where, in terms of priorities, even their own children's happiness takes a backseat to the likes of weed, expensive handbags, and clubbing it up on a Tuesday afternoon. I call this particular army of the undead the institutional Democrats. And whatever you do, don't you dare insinuate that them throwing away their best shot at happiness and fulfillment for the empowering and liberating opportunity to get passed around the office like a crusty tube sock might possibly one day leave them old, alone, and comprised almost exclusively of equal parts remorse, franzia, and penicillin. There's a reason why these fucking vampires can only defend their positions using newspeak and euphemisms like reproductive health, or it's just a clump of cells, or my body, my choice, which I don't know if any of my 17 subscribers happen to be a member of the conjoined twin community, but if there are, I hope that the progressive position that your life is worthless and entirely subject to the whims of your sibling just because you share a liver is enough to keep you from voting blue for the next couple of cycles. And by the way, it's not reproductive health, you goddamn snakes in the grass, it's prenatal obstetric health. Much as you may loathe the reality and try and escape from it as much as you can, reproduction already happened. And if it's just a clump of cells, an unrecognizable mass of tissue, why would any progressive argue against a law requiring a mother to see a sonogram image of her son before she can elect to have him dismembered, have his head crushed in with a sofa clamp, and then tossed unceremoniously into a medical waste dumpster? Or is it because you know that the second a mother lays eyes on her child, any ridiculous notion of harming him is going to go right out the window? Of course it is. They know just that. If they couldn't keep the truth from you by manipulating language or withholding evidence you can see with your own eyes, evidence like a picture of your beautiful boy growing inside that miraculous life-giving gift of a body that you've been blessed with, only the most emotionally dead and narcissistic ogres would actually swallow this affront to humanity and decency. Remember folks, progressivism dies, and dies fast without censorship. Imagine if the only way you could possibly get anybody to buy your argument is if you had to dress it up in soft, meaningless language that doesn't actually do anything to detail the reality of it. Or failing that, just plain old lying about it. Now imagine someone's made a career out of doing just that. Imagine someone who's consolidated power for themselves by convincing impressionable young women that not only is dismembering your child morally defensible, it should be celebrated. Go ahead and shout your abortion, these swamp rats insist. So much for safe, legal, and rare.
Our vision should be of an America where abortion is safe and legal, but rare.
Go ahead and imagine that, and hopefully you start to get an idea of why I revile these inhuman monsters as much as I do. And if you didn't already, I hope my little tirade was a good first step towards getting you heading in that direction. Because the best thing we can do to get these people out of positions of such significant influence is to let people see them for who they actually are. And I know this is all getting a bit abstract, but I can't emphasize enough how important the issue is. Friedrich Nietzsche is quite rightly famous for asserting that, quote, God is dead. But it's been my experience that most people are not only surprised to learn that there is much more to the quote, but that the sentiment behind the quote itself, much like our protagonist Daniel, is almost entirely contrary to how it's been popularized. Here's the quote in its entirety. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderer of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And I may not have the cheek or the sense of entitlement to try and sum up the most intimate and thought-provoking insights of one of the world's greatest intellectual titans. That is, at least not while I'm sober. But I can assure you, gentle viewer, that I'm currently dug into half the bag deeper than an Alabama tick in the middle of June, and I have the liver panel from my substance dependency counselor to prove it to you. What Nietzsche's effectively saying,
in the parlance of our times,
is that you and I are too fucking stupid to try and outsmart 300,000 years of human evolution by trying to eliminate the purpose and meaning we found in God without having the wherewithal to think to replace him with something, and in doing so, robbing humanity its only reason to keep from sprinting face first into a pile of cocaine, hookers, and gratuitous violence. One particularly well-renowned thief and degenerate once said, "Religion is the opiate of the masses." Interesting introspection there, Baron von Beard Dandruff. But funny enough, when religion stopped being the opiate of the masses in the West, opiates became the opiate of the masses, with much dire consequences resulting from it. And what's becoming quite evident, or what has become quite evident for my part, is that the most effective way to replace what is essentially man's only reason to keep him from destroying himself, as well as countless others around him, by way of the world of push-button access to unbridled hedonism we find ourselves living in here in the West, is to replace it with something greater than man perceives himself, something that can reinstill in him the virtues that have served as the most consistent variable to ensure not only his best shot at ameliorating his inevitable suffering, as well as the amelioration of the suffering and the flourishment of those he'll come to love by way of those virtues. And as I had alluded to previously, that something is purpose, as well as meaning through purpose, or rather, a source of perpetual joy that doesn't gradually devolve into a debilitating addiction. Through the engine of purpose, we sharpen those tools that help dig us out of the hole of unnecessary suffering.
Now, dig up, stupid.
Humility, discipline, and empathy. And as a man who's grappled with the notion of God his entire life, I was careful not to let that sense of ambivalence afford me an excuse to destroy myself through hedonism by way of nihilism. I did that by finding purpose in several ways. Through my family, through a desire to eliminate the unnecessary suffering of others, where it was welcomed, of course, through anger, and lastly through a disdain for injustice. But without question, the purpose that has provided and continues to provide the most joy and meaning for me is my family. What if it turns out that God, or more to the point here in the West, Judeo-Christian values pointed people in the direction of family, community, a sense of duty, humility, discipline, and empathy, not because it was necessarily divine wisdom, but simply because it worked. And at least I think most of us can agree that what works generally tends to outlast and endure above everything else that doesn't. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has the potential to fill you with more joy and meaning and purpose than family. No, I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass and tell you that it can't go the other way. In fact, nothing can be more crippling than the impacts their actions and circumstances can have on us. Having to bury a spouse, or God forbid a child, or seeing a younger brother or a beloved uncle fall prey to the likes of drugs or perversion, or gorging themselves at the trough of affirmation and attention they find through victimhood, the kind of self-destructive behavior that many politicians seem to have no problem applauding as brave expressions of your personal authenticity, of course, never leaves our hearts. But there's a reason why those things hurt the most when they befall us. It's because they're the aspects of our lives that make us the most happy, whether or not we have the time or the inclination to remind ourselves of that fact every single minute of every single day. But oftentimes it's not until they're taken away that we come to realize how much more important to us they actually were than anything else we'd been convinced needed to take precedence over them. Now, don't get me wrong, I love money, I love stuff, I think stuff is great. But what I could never understand, however, is how someone could be so emotionally dead inside that they can't even conceive the possibility that the happiness and fulfillment a person might get from a boat, or a gaming system, or an extravagant meal, or an expensive car, or indiscriminate sex would pale in comparison to hearing your child laugh for the first time, or call you mom or dad for the first time, or walk, or say I love you, or thank you for the sacrifices that you made for them, or to see them succeed after decades of hand-wringing over their prosperity and well-being. And it's for this reason that abortion and the dissolution of the traditional nuclear family model is a linchpin in the playbook of implementing progressive policy because, as the name suggests, progressing means positive growth through change. The problem with that, of course, is that in order for something to progress, it has to be flawed somehow. But what if it's not flawed? What if there's nothing that needs fixing? Or, more to the point, what if there are problems, but the society with them doesn't trust them to be fixed by a bloated, indifferent government? Well, that would be a very serious problem for the progressive politician whose well of power and influence hinges entirely on whether or not he can convince you that not only are you unhappy, but he and his cronies are the only ones who can make you happy. Now, what if we assume for a moment that a person who's granted so much power and influence, as well as all the money and amenities that come with that power, would be reluctant to give it up? Don't hurt yourself, but for the sake of discussion, let's consider this unlikely scenario. Do you think it would be outside the realm of possibility that he might consider destroying the institutions and aspects of a person's life that have demonstrably made them the happiest and the most stable, a reasonable means to which to achieve, maintain, and consolidate his powers? Well, if your answer was yes, and if you consider that nothing has been more satiating and stabilizing for human beings than the institutions of family and marriage, it stands to reason that any progressive politician desperate to keep his position would naturally do well to destroy those aspects of a person's life, or ensure that they're never inspired to pursue them in the first place. This is done, of course, as a means to cripple them emotionally, thereby leaving them desperate for solutions to the problems he assures them that are directly responsible for the emptiness and unhappiness they're experiencing. Don't worry, though, he can fix them, of course. He just needs your vote, or your money, or your blessing to let him impose more of himself in your personal life, or more than likely all three. When you call an unborn baby a clump of cells, or when you promote degeneracy or the celebration of victimhood as a means of personal affirmation to tens of millions of future mothers and fathers, again, despite what those who stand to reap the benefits of your misery and instability might say, you dehumanize, literally, the most beautiful and human thing you can possibly do with your life: make a family. And fighting against it starts by loving yourself enough to not share your heart, your soul, or your body frivolously, or by degrading human life, any human life, regardless of whatever point in their development they might be, by writing that life off as inherently disposable. You were there once, and I'm glad you made it. You very clearly have good taste, and I hope you stick around for a while, and I hope I can make you laugh. And maybe with a little luck, this can help you laugh with someone else, or maybe even a bunch of someone else's. Make no mistake, if you let them, they're more than happy to take this away from you if it affords them the opportunity for more power and influence. Don't let them take away the greatest possible joy you could ever hope to know, or take away the most precious gift you could ever give to someone. Go out there and get it, because you're worth it. And Daniel Plainview wasn't as bad as you remember him. Having said that, thanks again for being here. I hope to see you on the next one. But until that day, this is Santino Domani saying take care of yourself. And if you can, take care of someone else.